Okay.
You started it all.
Yeah. This
That's a good idea.
yeah. Okay. Good.
Good afternoon, people. Hello? Did somebody say whether they're seating me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, ready to begin. Before I start the lecture, the narrative, I want to go over the next review question. I think it's 6. And this review question concerns the relationship between Erasmus and Luther. It was even at the time of the Reformation, enemies of Erasmus basically accused him of laying the groundwork for Luther's revolution. In other words, as I phrased it, that Luther hatched the egg that Erasmus laid. Erasmus essentially prepared the ground. So I asked you to discuss this question. And overall approach is, I think for an answer, is yes and no. It's true that Erasmus is the person who made the decisive turn from studying the pagan classics, from studying Plato and Aristotle and Cicero, the Greeks and the Romans, into suggesting that the humanists with their methodology, turn their attention to study the Bible, especially in the New Testament. Now, why should they do so? Well, many people were criticizing the corruption of the church by the beginning of the 16th century. There are lots of theologians, humanists, intellectuals who said that the church had become corrupt, materialistic, immoral, and so on, and the popes in particular. But Erasmus said the same thing, but he was the first to suggest that the key to reform lay in going back to an understanding of the original Christianity, which could be found in studying the Bible. And so after about 1500, he made his life's work as a scholar, basically to prepare a critical edition of the New Testament in both Greek and Latin, using the best manuscripts available. And so in 1516, he finally published this very impressive volume. And with that, he gave the Christian world a new edition, a new and very up-to-date and critical edition of the New Testament, so that people could be sure of what exactly, for example, Jesus had to say in the New Testament. Alongside this scholarly activity, he kept publishing pamphlets and treatises, which they dealt with various issues, but above all, they criticized the church. Same questions: corruption, materialism, immorality, also superstition. And he more and more suggested that the answer was to go back to the Bible and discover what he called the philosophy of Christ. And basically this amounted to the Sermon on the Mount, a simple Christianity based on charity, on doing good works, towards not so much the good works embodied in ceremonials or the rites of the church, but doing charitable work and treating your neighbors in a kindly fashion. That had been, so that was Erasmus's orientation. But it should be underscored that he was a reformer, not a revolutionary. Erasmus did recognize, continued to recognize the authority of the Pope, of the councils, of the bishop, of the hierarchy of the church. He simply wanted the church itself to adopt this sort of purified form of Christianity. On the contrary, and this distinguishes Luther from Erasmus. Luther was a revolutionary. Oh, they were similar in that both placed a great emphasis on returning to the sources of Christianity, namely the New Testament. But Erasmus never said that that should be the only source of authority. No, he continued to recognize the Pope and what the council said, what the early church fathers said. He didn't have Luther's idea of the Bible and the Bible alone as the sole source of authority, which of course, if you accept that, you begin to you can question the authority of the Pope, the councils, of the fathers of the church. Now, another important thing is that Erasmus espoused this philosophy of Christ, which basically meant simple works of charity, a simplified Christianity, a belief in God and doing well unto your neighbor. But Luther, on the contrary, said that works of any kind, whether they're the rites and ceremonials of the church, the sacraments of the church, or even trying to do good works to your neighbor, none of these really would ultimately please God and ensure salvation. It is only faith and faith alone, which, if you have faith in the saving act of Jesus, that is to say, his crucifixion and resurrection, then you are saved. But works will not save you. He basically believed that human beings were too corrupt, too sinful to be saved by any works. Finally, the last point, and again, not followed by Erasmus, was he rejected the idea that there was a special, based on this biblically based justification by faith doctrine. He said that the idea that priests are somehow magical intermediaries between human beings and God, that they're giving the sacraments, it's somehow going to bring one to salvation, is a false idea, that it's only by faith. So all in all, Luther undercut the whole authority structure of the Catholic Church, which Erasmus did not do. Are there any questions about what I've just said? I hope it's clear, and maybe I can. Does anybody have any questions about what I said? Please intercede if you do. Good. Okay, let's now get into the body of the lecture.
Oh, thank God.
Now, yes? Yes? Hello? Okay, I'm going on. Well, we saw last time that in the face of the challenge of in the face of the challenge of the Protestants, the Catholic faith reformed itself and reasserted its basic teachings through the Counter-Reformation. And indeed, by about 1560, the Catholic Church had not only reformed itself, but through such missions as the Jesuits and the support of the political, the sort of feudal absolute rulers, notably the King of Spain, but also, say, the Duke of Bavaria, the Habsburgs, etc., the Catholic Church went on the offensive. It tried to recover the ground that it had lost but it faced opposition, and the opposition especially came from the most militant Protestants, namely the Calvinists, who we saw were especially strong amongst the emerging commercial and manufacturing middle classes in Europe. So we have a showdown between the Counter-Reformation, which in a sense represents the old dominant political and social authorities, namely the feudal class and the old monarchies, Spain above all, on the one hand, and then we have the rising middle class who follow Calvinism. And this ideological clash turned into a political and military conflict, which we call the religious wars. And the religious wars raged particularly in the Netherlands and in France during the latter part of the 16th century. There was an extension into Germany in the 17th century, but that doesn't, this is called the 30 Years' War, that doesn't immediately concern us. I want to begin by dealing with the Netherlands, the revolt of the Netherlands, which you recall, the Netherlands at this point, that is say in the 16th century, the Netherlands consisted of 17 provinces. There was no division between Holland on the one hand and the southern provinces, which ultimately became Belgium on the other. No, there were the Netherlands were basically a single entity, and they were part of Charles V's empire. Now, they loyally voted in their assemblies. They had local assemblies. They had, the towns had charters of liberties. They had a lot of privileges. At the same time, they paid their taxes to Charles V, significant taxes. But they treasured their autonomy, their sort of local political autonomy, very important to them. Well, when Charles V stepped down and his son took over, and here you see on the screen Philip II, 1556 to 98, comes to power in 1556. Well, he decides that the situation in the Netherlands is needs to be changed. The Netherlands has to become like Spain. He's a Spaniard, Philip II. And therefore, he's determined to centralize the government, to force the Netherlands into paying regular taxes, never mind local assemblies. And at the same time, he wants to suppress the heresy which is spread throughout the Netherlands, because as I was saying last time, the Netherlands is filled with Lutherans, Calvinists, Anabaptists, and what have you. And even the Catholics tend to follow Erasmus rather than the Counter-Reformation version of Catholicism. And so when Philip II increases taxes, begins to centralize the bureaucracy and impose this strict administration. And finally, when he makes it clear that he's going to bring in the Inquisition to ferret out the heretics, the Netherlanders rebel in 1566. And this rebellion includes not merely the Calvinists or the Lutherans, but the moderate Catholics join the rebellion. They don't like any of these ideas, including the threat of the Spanish Inquisition. Well, Philip II, when he learns about this uprising, he is determined to crush it. And he sends in the Spanish army, the crack Spanish infantry, marches into the Netherlands, and the Spanish army wreaks havoc. And by 1576, the southern part of the Netherlands is under Spanish military occupation. And this is the point, 1576. when you can see, because of the Spaniards permanently occupied the South, this turned into Belgium. Meanwhile, the North persisted in its rebellion, and the largest province in the North, by far, Holland, became the leader, or the Dutch became the leader of the rebellion. And ultimately, in a few years, they created the Dutch Republic. They seceded from the Spanish Empire. Now, this conflict went on for many, many years. It started back in 1566, and it continued into well into the 17th century.
You said if I can get it, I can have it right here. I bet.
I beg your pardon? Can you not hear me? Can you not hear me? There being no response,
We can
I
hear you.
think someone just forgot to mute their
what's
mic.
that?
We can hear
I
you.
think somebody just forgot to mute their mic, so they have background
Oh.
noise.
Please, would you intervene if there's if some sort of breakdown occurs? Thank you very much. So,
Sorry, as the host, you might be able to mute everyone's mic. I could be wrong, but there might be
I
an
think I
option for
can.
that.
I think I can. That was just some sort of intervention, right? Okay. So the Spaniards kept trying to overrun with their infantry, tried to advance and take over the northern, what is today Holland. But Holland is full of canals and rivers, perfect points of defense. So the Dutch army was able to stymie the absolute takeover of the country by the Spaniards. Meanwhile, in an extraordinary way, the Dutch actually began to prosper. While fighting this war, they began to actually, there was a spectacular expansion of the Dutch economy. How could this be? Well, many Protestants from the South fled to the North. Many of these people were business people. They were merchants or they were craftsmen, manufacturers. And they set up business in Amsterdam, which is still still the main city, I should say, of Holland. And Amsterdam grew spectacularly in these years of war. Tens of thousands of people, ultimately hundreds of thousands of people fled into Amsterdam. And Amsterdam became a huge center of commercial and manufacturing and financial activity right while the war was going on. Finally, the Dutch, who were, of course, very experienced as fishermen and also as merchant mariners, their activities essentially commercial, they developed this huge commercial fleet and navy, which not only was growing by leaps and bounds, but was challenging the Spanish by sea. And indeed, the Dutch ships began to raid the Spanish Empire in Latin America. They began to seize the treasure ships. They made it more and more difficult for the Spaniards to carry on. Now, one of the things I was pointing to was the fact that this spectacular rise of Holland bespeaks the fact that the North Atlantic area, England, Northwest Germany, Holland, this is becoming the center of the European economy. Italy, under Spanish occupation, is receding from the scene. The Italian economy precipitously declines in the last decades of the 16th century. Italy, which had been in the vanguard of capitalism, now fades out and is refeudalized, is the point. It's refeudalized. Whereas the North Atlantic, now energized by capitalism, forges ahead, and this becomes the center of the European economy. So this war continues. It is really what we can call the first war of national liberation. We've seen wars of national liberation in the 20th century. I'm thinking of wars like the Chinese War against Japan, or the Vietnamese War against the French and ultimately the Americans. These were prolonged conflicts, wars of national liberation. Well, the first of these actually occurred in Holland in the late 16th and early 17th century. Now, things were not complete. The Spaniards put up stiff military campaigns. And in 1585, it seemed that they were on the verge of actually conquering Holland. And at that moment, the Queen of England, Elizabeth, decided that she could not allow the Spaniards to install, it was too dangerous to allow the Spaniards, the Spanish Catholics. England by this point was a thoroughly Protestant country, could not allow the Spaniards to take over Holland. So she sent the English army into Holland to help the Dutch. This is 1585. Well, Philip II was outraged, and he decided that he would kill two birds with one stone. Not only would he suppress the Dutch, but he would deal with the English as well. He would reinforce the Spanish army in the Netherlands, and at the same time, he would send a vast naval expedition to land in England and to conquer England. And so it took him 3 years to get this thing off the ground. But at last, in 1588, in one of the climactic battles of European history, a armada of 130 Spanish ships and some 30,000 men and 2,400 artillery pieces set sail for England. And here is a contemporary lithograph showing the Spanish and the English fleet. Notice the incredibly sophisticated technology. Remember, I showed you these early sailing vessels of the Portuguese. Look at how sophisticated these.
We can't see the ship.
You can't see it?
No, we just see your notes.
I beg your pardon?
I think you have to share your screen every time you want to show us something else, like show us something new. So I think you have to reshare it.
You want to see a bigger screen?
No,
We can only see your notes right now.
Oh, I'll get rid of my notes?
No,
I'm
we're
not
just
sure.
saying we can't see the ship. Like, were
You
you
cannot
trying
see
to?
the ships.
Yeah, we can't see them.
Oh, okay, just a second. I don't seem to be able to. Can you see them now?
No.
No?
I believe you have to stop sharing the Word document, and then you can start sharing the wherever else the boats are.
Can you? This is all the best I can do.
Yeah, we can see
You
it
can't
now.
see it. You can't see it.
We can see it now. It's good.
You can see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Anyway, you can see that these vessels, these men of war, these galleons, they've become extremely sophisticated. They're very seaworthy. They're able to bear scores of heavy cannon. They have a huge number of sales. The technology become very sophisticated. I would point out that at the very time that we're speaking about, actually about 20 years earlier, in the Mediterranean, there had been a climactic battle between actually the Spanish Empire and the Turks, the Ottoman Turks, a great naval battle. It's called the Battle of Lepanto. It's just a parenthesis. But down there, the battle was fought out with galley ships, which are tiny vessels. And they go back to Greek and Roman times. So the North Atlantic, the contrast between the naval technology of the North Atlantic compared to the naval technology still current in the Mediterranean brings out the rise of the North Atlantic. The fact that the Mediterranean, from an economic and technological point of view, is being dwarfed by the North Atlantic economy. That's the point I'm trying to make. Well, this battle was fought largely in the English Channel and to a little extent in the North Sea, and the English emerged triumphant. Many Spanish ships were sunk, but even more were shipwrecked in a storm. And the English, this is considered to be one of the great founding events of the English Empire, this victory of the Spanish Armada in 1588. And as a result of this defeat, the Spaniards were not able to invade England, nor were they able to take over Holland. And as a matter of fact, by 1609, it was clear that Spanish power was declining, and the power of the Dutch and of the English was growing. And in 1609, the Spaniards asked for a truce in this conflict. Indeed, Spain entered into a decline, and the decline was amplified by the fact that the supplies of gold and silver, which during the 16th century had seemed inexhaustible, now began to dry up. And Spain, as I have explained, had destroyed basically its commercial and manufacturing base. So there was no good, there was less and less gold, and there was no real economy left. So Spain, by the middle of the 17th century, is basically defeated, and the Spanish Empire from this point is in complete decline. And what emerges then in the 17th century is this little country, Holland, emerges as actually the dominant power in Europe for a period of about 30 or 40 years in the middle of the 17th century until toward its end. Holland is the leading power in Europe.
Professor?
Yes. 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 Please talk.
Excuse me, Professor?
Yes. Please talk. Say something.
Your connection is not working very well. You're cutting out a lot.
You're saying it's the connection is broken?
We can't hear you very well. You're cutting out. Your connection is bad.
Okay, what I suggest we do is take a 2-minute break. Let's take a 2-minute break and try. I was told to try this, to adjourn for 2 minutes. Okay?
Okay.
Oh, can you hear me now? Somebody say something. Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Hello? Can you hear me?
I think you're still cutting. We can't hear you
Yeah.
properly.
I hear.
Yeah, they're there.
Yes, we can hear you.
You hear me? Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the Dutch economy. What was the basis of the power of the Dutch? Well, it was capitalism. This is the first we see up until this point. Capitalism.
Professor, I'm
Yes.
sorry, you're
Yes.
Professor.
Is it broken?
You're still breaking up. Sorry.
I'm still breaking.
Well,
I'm still breaking up.
maybe it's.
But can you hear? Can you hear the sound?
Hmm?
As long as the sound is there, like, can you hear you? Like,
Does everybody?
can you listen clearly?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
No, your sound is breaking up a lot. Your sound is breaking up.
Can you hear me?
No.
It's sort of
Well, we
coming
can
in
hear
and
you,
out.
but your voice is
5
breaking
minutes,
out. I think your
okay?
connection is really poor.
The connection is not good, so let's wait for 3 minutes. See, okay, it's 1:02 right now. Let's
I
wait.
just tried that. I tried to break. Well, we'll try one more
Break.
break. This is being recorded, so the substance of the lecture will be is being recorded. But at the same time, we'll take this break. Okay, I'm signing off. Can you hear me now? Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I can
Okay.
hear you anyway.
Okay. So I guess what I'm saying is,
Yes, I can hear you. Like,
Yeah.
I can. Anyway.
you hear me? Okay. What I'm saying is that Holland was a capitalist economy. It had a capitalist agriculture.
You're breaking out again.
Okay. I guess
Cutting
what-
out a lot.
Oh, my.
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to continue lecturing, but the lecture will appear on the video. And of course, the lecture will also be, the notes are available as well. So I'm going to continue the lecture. So Holland had a capitalist agriculture. It had a lot of capitalist industries, including the shipbuilding industry, because they had 10,000 merchant vessels and a navy. It had a fishing industry, a large textile manufacturing industry. And with its 10,000 merchant vessels, it was able to control the commerce of the Baltic and the North Atlantic, the wood, the iron ore, the grain, which came from the Baltic region, was all under the control of the Dutch. And their economy was so strong that basically the French and the Spanish economy became dependent on the Dutch. And so they were able to draw into Amsterdam things like wine and olive oil and wool and salt and gold and silver and spices from the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the French empires. Now, going beyond commercial capitalism and manufacturing capitalism, they broke into what we call financial capitalism. They established the Bank of Amsterdam, the first real bank in Europe. was established by the Dutch at the beginning of the 17th century. The first stock exchange, the first insurance company was established by the Dutch. The emergence of what we call finance capital, which is the most sophisticated form of capital. And to cap this off, in 1602, they created, in order to take over the Portuguese Empire in Asia, they founded the Dutch East India Company. Now, this is an extraordinary enterprise because it is basically like a modern corporation. It's a joint stock company, limited liability. You invest, and based on the profits of the company, you get a return. This is a new mechanism for accumulating capital. So with all of that, they basically took over the whole of the Portuguese Empire, except for some remnants in Asia, fell into the hands of the Dutch. They took over the tip of South Africa. The Cape of Good Hope became a Dutch colony. And they established, alongside the Dutch and the Spaniards and the Portuguese, sugar plantations in the northeastern part of Latin America. The area, particularly in and around Venezuela, the Dutch established, the Dutch Guiana emerged as an important sugar plantation area. Now, with all of that said, the Dutch, this is extremely impressive, but the Dutch were simply too small in terms of the further development of capitalism in Europe. The population was too small. They didn't have enough people. And toward the end of the 17th century, the great power across the Channel, the English, in a series of wars, began to defeat the Dutch. And meanwhile, they were threatened by invasion from the even more gigantic feudal kingdom of France. So Dutch capitalism was wedged between the French and the English. Somebody intervened. I'm continuing. The Dutch were squeezed between the French and the English. Well, they had to choose. And so they ultimately chose to ally themselves and to subordinate themselves to the English and to English capitalism. They were capitalists, so were the English. The French, on the other hand, was a feudal absolutism under Louis XIV and seemed very threatening. So at this point, what happens, and this remains the case, Dutch capitalism is subordinated to the rising English capitalism. And I want to, of course, before I turn away from Europe, I want to deal with, of course, events in England, the rise of this capitalism, and also the political revolution that develops in England, the bourgeois revolution. But for the rest of today, I want to speak about French history, this feudal absolutism, the fate of that, because it plays such a huge role in European history. We have to consider it. Now, we saw that at the beginning of the 16th century, France was a new territorial monarchy like Spain and England, especially under Francis I, who I singled out as the powerful king of the first part of the 16th century. But in the second part of the 16th century, because it was overextended, we could put it that way, the people were overtaxed, and meanwhile, the Protestant religion in the form of Calvinism infiltrated itself into France. France, like the Netherlands in 1662, descended into, please mute your mic, descended into civil war, religious war between Calvinists and Catholics.
No, all the
And,
teachers do that.
and for the
They
next
all
30
release
or
them
so
on-
years,
Let's see what I can find on YouTube.
somebody is,
God damn, I can't.
for the next 35 years, France was engulfed in a terrible civil war, which actually cost the life of several million French people. So Catholics and Calvinists were at each one of the throats. Nobles were fighting their little wars with one another. The cities were in rebellion. People weren't paying any taxes to the monarchy, and so the whole place was in a chaos. But finally, in 1589, the leader of the Calvinists, the new sort of leader of the Calvinist party, decided somehow this situation has got to be brought to an end. The name of this person was Henry IV. Call him that. The founder of the Bourbon monarchy, Henry IV. An outstanding military leader,
I guess I'll just.
but also very smart. And so in 1589, he announces that, in fact, although he's the leader of the Protestant side, he says the saying was, Paris is worth a mass. In other words, if I have to convert to the Catholic religion in order to bring an end to this conflict, I'm going to do so. I'm going to put political peace before my religious ideas. And so he converts to the Catholic religion, and he's able to bring peace, political and religious peace to the French. This is embodied in a proclamation that he puts out in 1598.
James, mute your mic.
Called the Edict of Nantes, 1598, which grants toleration to the Protestants. And with that, the religious wars in France come to an end. And Henry IV, now the king, he sets about restoring France politically and economically. And as I said, there was terrible destruction. But now the government, and I mentioned this in a previous lecture, the government now begins to actively reconstruct the economy. They put up tariffs. They give merchants and manufacturers all kinds of subsidies. This is called mercantilism, and the French economy begins to recover. So there's religious peace, there's political peace, and there's economic reconstruction under this good king, Henry IV. Alas, in 1610, he's murdered by a Catholic extremist, kills him in the streets of Paris, plunges a knife into his heart. So in 1610, he's carried away. And he's succeeded by basically a baby boy who becomes Louis XIII, following the death of Henry IV. Louis XIV reigns from 1610 to 43. And Louis XIII was no great statesman, but he had by his side a prime minister by the name of Richelieu. Cardinal Richelieu. He was a cardinal of the Catholic Church. But what he was really was a Machiavellian statesman. He thoroughly mastered Machiavelli's ideas. And basically, even though he was a Catholic, he basically acted in behalf of, above all, even against the interests of the church, building up a strong France. A French government was his aim. So he called this policy raison d'etat, reason of state, that the state is the ultimate political organism and has to be supported at all costs, and using the techniques of Machiavelli. The ends justify the means. do anything in order to build up state power. That's Richelieu's teaching after Machiavelli. And so Richelieu carries on the work of Henry IV. He builds up the economy. He builds up the French military. He creates the Spaniards are doing everything they can to sort of undermine the rise of French power. Richelieu builds up a big army, and he enters a system of alliances which reinforce French power. And at the end of his reign, I would say that France has become the dominant power on the continent. I'm not saying the Dutch are still dominant because of their economy, but nevertheless, in political military terms, France is ascendant by 1648. Well, all of this is climaxed in the reign of the Sun King, Louis XIV. Louis XIV, known as the Sun King, who has a very long reign, 1643 to 1713. And the way I would think about Louis XIV is that he is trying to emulate Charles V. Charles V, you remember, tried to basically unify all of Europe under the Habsburg dynasty. Well, now Louis XIV, with the great power that he's able to sort of muster, tries to do exactly the same thing, to conquer and subdue all of Europe, including England, and bring it all under the power of France. And that's what his reign is all about. Well, he was known as the Sun King because everything radiated from him. Well, the first thing he did was he created a whole new class of government officials called intendants or intendants. And these officials were given complete authority by the king. They went down into the provinces of France and they basically imposed centralized control over the whole of France. For the first time, these intendants basically brought all the local authorities, which were still allowed to kind of a shadowy existence, but the intendants became essentially the local governors of all of the French provinces. Secondly, he broke using the intendants, but also using the French police and army, he broke the power of the nobility for good. The noble's power was based on local landed power and alliances. The 20,000 top nobles were basically ordered to move from their local estates to come live with the king at the great new palace of Versailles, close to Paris. So he puts the independents into government at the local level, and he forces the nobility to live with him in the palace of Versailles, just outside of Paris. Versailles was a veritable city filled with noblemen and their servants, and it became the center of European culture, fashion, and diplomacy under Louis XIV. So there's this enormous accretion of power on the part of Louis XIV. He claimed that his power came directly from God, and we consider this claim the notion of the divine right of kings. He's the first person to say, my power comes directly from the king, from God. Well, we'll see how this worked out in the next lecture. I'm sorry that things did not go well, but this lecture is on tape.